Just a sec. Just a sec. So hello everyone. For those of us who just joined us, today's webinar is on the implementation of the AfCFTA, the case of South Sudan, Cameroon, and Zambia. We are joined by John Mustapha, the founder of OLENT, Organization for Liberty, Entrepreneurship, Organization for Liberty and Entrepreneurship, Kenny Suze, who was the lead researcher from Impact Center in Zambia, and myself, Henri Kouam. And today, they're all on our panel with Mr. Dinga Tambi, who is going to be providing an update from Cameroon's perspective. So Mr. John just gave us a brief overview and said that in South Sudan, policymakers themselves are not really aware about the AfCFTA, and since Parliament sent it to the President's office for the agreement to be ratified, it hasn't, which means that they've not published their tariff schedules and they are not on track. They're not participating in the Guided Trade Initiative. I would like to get just general overview from Kenny. Now, from what we're seeing, South Sudan will succeed with good infrastructure, knowledgeable policymakers, and good trade infrastructure. Can you give us an update on the general view of where we are in terms of the implementation of the AfCFTA in Zambia?
All right. Thank you very much, Henry. And apologies from time to time my video on and off because I'm trying to balance the bandwidth. Because if
that's fine, that's fine. That's all.
So apologies for that. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for the opportunity to contribute to this discussion. So just overview about Zambia is that we're a land-linked country in Southern Africa. We're strategically positioned at the crossroads of Central, Eastern, and Southern Africa, and our population is estimated at 20 million. So as Zambia, we ratified the AfCFTA in 2021, and we have since taken steps to align our domestic systems with this. There's the national AfCFTA strategy, which was adopted in 2022, and the 2024 statutory agreement, which aligned tariff schedules. So basically, as Zambia, we're moving from commitment towards implementation. But some of the challenges that we face in 2023, our country recorded about 11.2 billion US dollars in terms of exports, with copper making nearly 70% of that total. So this level of concentration makes diversification essential for us as Zambia to fully benefit from this continental trade. Then also in 2024, our exports increased from around 21% to about 26%. Regional trade integration was slowly strengthening. Then also in 2025, that is last year, we at least got our first huge step in this direction towards the AfCFTA. We did our first commercial beef consignment with the Democratic Republic of Congo, which was valued at about $62,000. Well, it is small. Well, it signified our potential to become a regional supplier of agricultural products. Yeah,
that sounds great. So it means that Zambia has already published the tariff schedules and they're already transitioning towards meaningful trade under the AfCFTA, and they can already leverage their exports of minerals, and their location along the Lobito corridor makes them a vital artery for continental trade in Southern Africa, but the rest of Africa. We're going to come back to the specifics of trade. We'll talk about minerals and country-specific dynamics. But Mr. Dinga Tambi, in less than 4 minutes, can you give us just an overview on how the AfCFTA is being implemented?
Okay, thank you very much, Henry. So far, unlike in Sudan, unlike Sudan that hasn't yet ratified the treaty, and pretty much like Zambia that's already ratified, Cameroon is a pioneering nation in the African Continental Free Trade Area implementation. Cameroon, as you all know, Cameroon ratified the agreement in 2019 and adopted the national strategy and participation in the inaugural Guided Trade Initiative in 2022. In fact, so far, key achievements has been issuing the first certificates of origin in Central Africa for exports to maybe Ghana, and Cameroon has already been reducing tariffs for regional goods and training equally over 80 small and medium-sized enterprises on export procedures. Hello?
I'm here. We can hear you. We can hear you. Sorry. Yes, go on, Mr. Dinga.
Okay. Sorry. Your body language made me think maybe you weren't hearing me because I can watch you on the screen and I thought you were okay. So like I mentioned, reducing of tariffs and equally the training of over 80 SMEs on export procedures are some of the measures that Cameroon has taken so far to prepare itself for this very great initiative for the continent. Like I mentioned above, Cameroon is one of the countries that was selected one of the few countries that were selected to pilot this initiative through the Guided Trade Initiative of the African Continental Free Trade Area in 2022, and the effective testing and operation and of the institution and its legal framework is presently ongoing with Cameroon as we are already into the test total of the initiative. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you, Mr. Dinga. So Cameroon signed in 2018. It was one of the state parties to actually sign on the day, right, in July. And then Parliament ratified, and they gave the president the authority to essentially make it national legislation. And then, of course, we joined the Guided Trade Initiative, where Cameroon was actually a pioneer of the Guided Trade Initiative with 8 other countries, from Kenya to Tanzania to Mauritius. And since then, a few companies have exported. But so now I'll start with Kenny on this one. Right, Kenny, we see that in South Sudan, clearly they need good institutions who can effectively communicate. Yes, Mr. Dinga, I'll come back to you. I just want to pose a question to Mr. Kenny before we come back to you. So, Mr. Kenny, clearly from John's intervention and from Mr. Dinga's intervention, we find that the institutions in both countries are working differently, right? But for Zambia and South Sudan, for example, can you tell me what is the importance of trade infrastructure? Because we might have all the policies in place, we might have signed all the agreements, the tariff schedules could be operational at various borders. But if we don't have infrastructures like roads, ports, railways, it will be difficult to trade. So, Mr. Kenny, can you just tell us what's the importance of having good trade infrastructure in all these countries?
Thank you for this very important question, Henry. You see, trade infrastructure is the foundation of, on which the AfCFTA implementation truly depends, because trade arrangements may remove tariffs, but it is the infrastructure which determines whether goods can actually move across borders effectively. For instance, for Zambia, this is especially important because the country is land-linked. Yeah? Its competitiveness therefore depends on reliable transport corridors that connect producers to regional markets and international ports. For instance, corridors such as the Lobito Corridor, the North-South Corridor, and rail systems like the Tazara are therefore essential not only for mining exports, but also for agriculture, trade, and manufacturing.
Okay.
So, like in your case, for instance, Cameroon, your country has already started trading under the AfCFTA through the Guided Trade Initiative.
Yeah,
exactly the point. Where at least you're exporting products such as tea and other agricultural goods. But for this trade to expand meaningfully, Cameroon will need continued investment in road networks, efficient customs systems, and stronger logistics as well. Then, on the aspect of South Sudan, the situation is even very foundational because already we have established that while it has signed the AfCFTA agreement, it has only yet fully completed the ratification and operational steps needed to participate effectively. So, in short, when infrastructures work, even the AfCFTA moves from policy ambition to real economic opportunity. So that in itself is why trade infrastructure is extremely important.
So if I can just come back to the policy brief that was published by John, yourself, and I, one of the common recommendations we found is that we have to reduce information asymmetry, which is what John spoke about, the fact that people don't have information. But in terms of infrastructure, we spoke about also improving the physical infrastructure like roads, but also the digital infrastructure and boosting the capacity of customs officials, which you spoke about. But John, I just want to come back to you in terms of where we are in South Sudan. What do you think? What's holding back South Sudan's implementation, based on your opinion, and what does South Sudan have to do to accelerate the implementation of the AfCFTA based on what we found?
This is my own opinion, and this is my own view regarding my analysis of the situation in South Sudan. And what I believe what is holding South Sudan a little bit behind in the implementation of this agreement is one that they are a little bit cautious, because being a new country, most of the infrastructures are not yet in place. In terms of the logistic, like what my colleague has just said, in terms of the logistic, the road networks, the ports, the airports, they are not yet well established, such that goods and services can move from South Sudan and into South Sudan as we expect it. And also the other issue is the issue of the institutions. So the institutions that are entitled to ensuring the full implementation of the Africa Continental Free Trade Area, their capacities are not yet fully strengthened to cope up with the regional trade. So, and because of this, South Sudan is a bit cautious of being used as a dumping ground for those developed economies in Africa. So it's
sorry, if I can just interrupt for 1 second. You know that the AfCFTA has different schedules in terms of liberalizing tariffs, right? So for developing countries, for non-least developing countries, they have 7 years to liberalize 97% of their tariff lines, and it's 10 to 15% for the other tariff lines for developing countries. So ultimately, the smaller countries are going to be subject to much greater competition. But does that not mean that there's an urgency to implement the AfCFTA as opposed to slow its implementation, because it would happen eventually?
Yes, I fully agree with you, but this is the situation on the ground, where the country is trying to be a little bit protective from the developed African countries. So what you are saying is right, but this is the situation on the ground, where when you speak to most of the government officials or people who are responsible for this agreement, so all what they are saying is we are yet a new country, and we are afraid that if we open up and join the
AfCFTA,
so we might risk being used by the developing nations to have their goods into the country. So it's all about being protective at the moment. But nevertheless, we are trying to enlighten the government that this is not the issue. So there are stages for implementation of this agreement. So you can sign the agreement and then the implementations are based on the phases and also on the protocols. So it's all about being protective of the country. So this is what is and making South Sudan to lag behind in the implementation. And also the other issue is, my own opinion, is lack of awareness. Like what I said, if the leaders are not aware about the content of the agreement, so they might look at it as a threat to them because they don't know the real content of the document and how this document can help the country in improving the economy of the country. So, and even the market, the bigger market that they would enjoy, they are not yet aware about it. So it's all about being aware about the content of the agreement and knowing about the benefit that it would give to the country if this agreement is put into action. So these are things that I believe are making South Sudan to lag behind in the implementation process of the Africa Continental Free Trade Area.
All right, thank you very much. So you've spoken about the lack of information, which we in the policy brief spoke about information asymmetry. You've spoken about a need to protect local and domestic markets. But Mr. Dinga, let me come to you now. You see, when Mr. John talks about in the policy brief, the focus was about, there's a lot of focus on capacity building in Cameroon, even though it's still not enough. And we're doing our best to train 1,000 people every year. But when Mr. John refers to developing countries like Cameroon as having the potential to, to overtake their markets, is that the reality? And what do you think from what is Cameroon doing in order to ensure that, we play by the rules in terms of the implementation of the AfCFTA? And, do you really think a country like Cameroon, Nigeria, South Africa, Egypt, do they really pose a threat to other African countries when it comes to opening up?
Yeah, thank you very much, Henry. I must say that it's not some sort of a threat, but the reality on the ground is just like John mentioned. The various economies in Cameroon that have ratified or that have signed are not of equal economic power. Of course, if you want to compare Cameroon to Sudan, which it's pretty much a new country.
Yeah, very
Cameroon
new.
is a better economy. Yeah, but at the same time, if you equally want to compare Cameroon to Nigeria, which is one of the major powerhouses in Africa, it faces it's a similar situation. Nevertheless, I would go with what John said. It's not actually a risk, but I think since the agreement has phases in which it has to be implemented, each country needs to first of all master its strength, master its weaknesses, and then quickly try to adjust internally while it is adopting the phase at which it finds itself in terms of the agreement. At the end of the day, this agreement wasn't meant to be a threat to any country. It's meant to be beneficial. And we need to understand that every country in Africa equally, it actually has something to offer. So it's just a matter of Sudan identifying its strength, identifying its weakness, which Mr. John already pointed out. I think during his presentation, or maybe infrastructural development, logistics, and so on, which are pretty much equally some of the challenges that Cameroon and other African countries are facing. If we can adjust these things, and if we can identify our strength in terms of this agreement, then I think it's an agreement that is going to be beneficial for every nation if everyone can focus on what part of it is going to benefit.
Competitive advantage, right?
Competitive, exactly, the competitive advantage.
Yeah, but so clearly, Mr. Kenny in Zambia, it's all about minerals. South Sudan, I think, is in a unique position because they have this young democracy that has the ability to leapfrog. Cameroon just has some manufacturing capacity, right? Manufacturing is about between 13 to 17% of GDP. So it is developing, but very slowly. What I'd like for us to talk about now for the panel, maybe starting with Mr. Kenny, is we've spoken about capacity building a lot. What are the types of capacity building that we need to make sure that the AfCFTA becomes an operational reality in Africa? We've said infrastructure, that's one. And we've said that we need to raise awareness. But in terms of customs officials, in terms of entrepreneurs, what types of capacity do we need to build in them for them to make free trade in Africa a reality? So we'll start with Mr. Kenny, and then we'll go Mr. Dinga, and then John, and then we'll just mix it up the next time. So Mr. Kenny, you have the floor. If you can just quickly tell us, like, how can everyone talks about capacity building, but what does it really mean in practice? And how can we ensure that customs officials or businesses have the skills they need? If Mr. Kenny is not available, John, do you just want to take that question? Like when we talk about capacity building, what do we mean for both in the public, but also in the private sector?
Thank you so much. Regarding the capacity building, I think it will depend on each country why they think they are not being well, or they are not very much aware about the content of the Africa Continental Free Trade Area. In my situation here in South Sudan, I think one of the areas that need capacity building is the issue of the cross-border trade. Free trade, that's one of the areas that needs a lot of capacity building. People really do not understand what it means to have a free trade. Because once we talk about the free trade, most of the people misunderstand it to be where goods will cross one country to another without even taking a small tax from it. Okay? So we need to help our people to understand that when we talk about free trade area or free trade or free cross-border trading, so it means goods and services can cross from one country to another country, but it is also subjected to a minimal taxation, not to overtax it. And this is one area that they should understand, because most of the time when we talk about free trade, they believe that they are going to lose revenue.
Yes, absolutely.
From the goods and services that are crossing the border.
So it means that we have to reframe the conversation to ensure that to make free trade essentially meets the local context, right? To policymakers, we remind them that free trade is about reducing tariffs and non-tariff barriers, but it doesn't stop them from gaining some revenue. This is why in the AfCFTA, 3% of goods from countries, 3% of tariff lines have been excluded from the agreement to allow countries the ability to raise some revenue. And where there are revenue losses, there's also the AfCFTA Adjustment Fund, which needs to be operationalized, but has already been launched. So it means that capacity should start first with, in some ways, changing hearts and minds, right? Changing the understanding of how we approach free trade in Africa. Thank you for that, Mr. John.
Exactly, yeah.
Henri, if I might add something on capacity building. Yeah, just like John mentioned, actually the capacity building goes two ways. It's the public building the capacity of the public sector, and equally building the capacity of the private sector. For the public sector, for example, it's very important because the agreement comes with a lot of reforms. So it's very important to carry out trainings on custom reforms, the use of digital tools, especially for custom officials. We know the challenges of knowledge and access to digital tools in Africa. And equally for preparedness of trade and reducing non-tariff barriers, just like John mentioned. Equally, there is a high need for institutional strengthening, because, like John mentioned, some of the institutions that are already existing. I might take, for example, in South Sudan, where the National Implementation Unit was actually created to facilitate the implementation of the African Continental Free Trade Area. But then, what is the capacity, or what is the strength of this institution to effectively ensure that Sudan can pull out the benefits from this agreement? So there is a need to build the capacity, in fact, institutional strengthening. And in terms of the private sector, there are a lot of things that private enterprises or enterprises need to note. I would take, for example, trade compliance. We need to educate our businesses on the rules of the origin. First of all, they should understand that there are sanitary, there are phytosanitary measures, there are technical barriers to trade. It doesn't just entail reducing tariff, but then if you do not meet the sanitary, the phytosanitary, and other barriers to trade, it's still not going to be beneficial.
So,
Equally,
Mr.
we need
Dinga,
to,
sorry to interrupt your thought. Just one thing. Now, you see, when we talk about Mr. Kenny, is Mr. Kenny there? Mr. Kenny Suze. Okay. I think Mr. Kenny has.
Yes, I'm here.
So we, Mr.
No, I'm
Dinga,
here. The challenge.
Okay. So in terms of the technical barriers to trade, is it okay for us? And I think is it important for us to make a distinction between necessary technical barriers to trade, like sanitary and phytosanitary measures will prevent Africans from, getting another coronavirus, right? So are some technical barriers to trade necessary? And when are they necessary? Is it when they're scientific, or is it when they protect animal, plant, and human health? Like, are there useful barriers to trade, and are there unuseful ones? And can we make that distinction? Anyone on the panel can have a go at that. Yeah. Okay, Mr. Kenny, you've left us for a while. Do you want to have a go at that?
Oh yeah. And if anything, it even reinforces our previous discussion that we're from having on the aspect of capacity building. I think one thing, especially from the Zambian part, that I have seen is that there's a challenge with regards to standards and certification capacity. For instance, you've talked about the aspect of what? The need of stronger sanitary and phytosanitary systems, yeah? The reason why this is very important is that, for instance, in our case as Zambia, we need such systems so that the agricultural and manufactured products can meet continental requirements. Yeah, so that is extremely important.
Okay, so certification, clearly, because certification is what allows us to standardize our products, right? Across the continent, we don't want countries selling milk that's bad, because that could cause, upset stomachs across the region. We don't want businesses selling any food that may be contaminated. This is why we have to be certified products like tea, dried ginger, etc., to protect the health and safety of Africans. So some technical barriers to trade are essential, but they move from being useful to being barriers when compliance is expensive and lengthy. So just a quick example, in Cameroon, the certification process can take up to 3 months. And we learn from entrepreneurs that sometimes even more, even when they've paid in advance and they've conducted all the tests for their products, etc. So that's when it becomes a barrier. But Mr. Dinga, did you want to add something, or Mr. John? How do we make sure that those essential aspects of trade, like certification, sanitary and phytosanitary standards, how do we ensure that they don't become trade barriers?
Okay, if you permit, I will go first. On my personal, my point of view, honestly, I think once we start getting into a solution of agreements like we have for the African Continental Free Trade Agreement, there are some issues that we need to start thinking about harmonizing in the continent. Because at the end of the day, if we are going to have regulations on sanitary and phytosanitary aspects quite different from one country to another, then at the end of the day, it's still going to cause a problem. We are moving into more serious issues. I think it's time for the continent to start thinking about harmonizing for particular specific products the phytosanitary or the sanitary standard, which could be somehow standards that could be respected entirely in the continent, to make it to ensure that it doesn't become a barrier or it doesn't become a hindrance. You quite mentioned here that in Cameroon it could take sometimes up to 3 months. Why not harmonize and have an agreement that, okay, in every of the states that are ratified, we need to ensure that these phytosanitary certifications could be gotten within a minimum or within a period of maybe 1 to 2 or maximum 3 weeks, so that we ensure that everyone is on the same page. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much, Mr. Dinga. But I'd also like to note that there's Ms. John, Kenny, any comments? We have the AfCFTA protocols, right? And the protocols provide, if you look at the protocols for good with its 8 or 10 annexes, There's protocols on customs cooperation, protocols on sanitary and phytosanitary standards. And so there's already a guide to help countries like align and harmonize their standards over the long run. But unfortunately, implementation is slow. So recently, Nigeria ratified the protocol on digital trade, but we need to ensure that we're getting more and more countries to ratify the protocols and actually begin implementing them. Okay, I would like us, we've digressed a little bit, right? But I'd like us to come back to the question of private sector readiness. In Africa, over 60% of the population is below the age of 35. We have a ballooning youth population. And so SMEs, women, and youths are vital in the implementation of the AfCFTA. Now, I want our panelists to maybe tell us how can we ensure that women and youth and entrepreneurs play a more active role in its implementation based on our current context of high informality, limited access to credit, difficult administrative procedures, limited access to finance and capital. How should women and youth be thinking about the AfCFTA in this context? John, let's start with you this time.
Thank you. This is one of the areas that is very dear to the heart of the South Sudan government, because in 2025, there was a national dialogue on ratifying the protocol on women and youth in business. So in this dialogue, there was also these issues where discussing on how we can encourage more women to get into business, as well as more youth into getting into business, as they believe that youth and women are the engines of doing a prosperous business in South Sudan. So it was looking at ways we can ensure that there is a favorable environment for both women and youth to get into business. And one of the most important things that they were discussing was access to financing, as just what you did. Because in this discussion, most of the youth were talking about one is bureaucracy in the registration of their business, and also lack of access to the finance. So there was more elaborate discussion on how we can ensure that business registration is done within a very short time possible. So this was where the policies in South Sudan were being discussed so that align and also support the implementation of the Africa Continental Free Trade Area in terms of ensuring that business registration and all the procedures that are involved are as simple as possible so that they can be able to register and run a legal business. And the other discussion was also around the issue of the finance, where most of the youth were discussing issues to do with lack of access to finance. And as a country that is also gearing towards a full implementation of the Africa Continental Free Trade Area, there was need to make sure that the youth have access to financing so that they can be able to get loans or maybe some grants in order to run up their own business. So those were some of the things that were very key in the discussion, and which I think is also very fundamental in the implementation of the Africa Continental Free Trade Area, because issues to do with business registration, the bureaucracies that are involved, are also one of the barriers to making sure that business is done smoothly. So if we are able to make that, we create a favorable environment where women and youth are able to get business, and also they are able to register their business within the shortest time possible, and also where they are free to trade in whatever kind of goods that they believe in trading in, as long as it doesn't pose a threat to the national security. So they are allowed to get involved in that kind of business.
Okay. Well, can we just, this one thing that we have to talk about, right? Women and youth are usually, women are usually locked in the agricultural sector. In Cameroon, they produce up to 80% of food crops. And I think the trends across the continent are similar, right? Women are, so they're responsible for, in some parts, household, but also entrepreneurial work. How do we ensure now that women are able to transition to those higher value added sectors like technology or, fashion or, banking and finance or communications. How do we ensure that that transition happens for not only women, but also youths who tend to be marginalized in the implementation of the AfCFTA? Kenny, do you want to have a go? And then Mr. Dinga, and then Dinga, you will give us an overview of what strategies we can implement from Cameroon's perspective.
Yes, please. I think it all borders down to skills and business capacity. Because what I've noted is that, especially here in Zambia, first and foremost, there's a challenge with awareness and access to information. You find that many young entrepreneurs and women-led businesses still have very limited knowledge about the AfCFTA and what it has to offer. Then with regards to those areas that you've talked about, I feel there's need for support in terms of, okay, let's say we teach the women and youth with aspects to do with export procedures, product standards, marketing, digital trade, so that at the end of the day, their businesses can compete in the regional markets. And one thing that Zambia has done, especially with regards to the adoption of the national AfCFTA strategy, is that it prioritizes sectors such as agribusiness and services, which these are the areas where, especially in my country, where women and youth are highly active. Yeah.
Okay.
And
so
also,
it's aligned the AfCFTA implementation with national priorities.
Exactly. And also, there's an ongoing initiative by the Ministry of Commerce, Trade and Industry, where they promote institutions aimed at sensitizing SMEs about the AfCFTA opportunities. And, you'd be thrilled to know that the major composition of these. Yes, you'd be thrilled to know that the major composition of these SMEs and these SMEs women and the youth.
Mr. Dinga, let's come back to you. Clearly we have to upskill women and youths, right? But from a policy standpoint, how do we align the launch a recent fund, a 50 million fund for women and youths? That's what the president launched after the elections that were contested. How can we ensure that it translates from big announcements, big ticket figures to women and youth who have the capacity to export? The reason I ask this question is because in Cameroon, some companies have exported. The first company was an SME called Jik Afatex, run by a woman, and she exported tea and dried safou fruits to Ghana. All other companies who've exported ever since, over 19, are huge companies like Alukam, Inonda Sal, Dawarati Estates. So it's really, really vital for us to think about how we can make the AfCFTA a reality for SMEs. So, Mr. Dinga, from Cameroon's perspective, what do we do to ensure that the policies translate into impact? Because the capacity building is good, but the policies are equally quite important.
Yes, you're absolutely right, Henry, because we have a problem of implementing the policies. The idea and the initiative is fine, but then on the ground, that is not what we seem to realize. On the ground, it's not concrete. Implementation is not concrete. Well, I wouldn't want to blame it only the slowness in implementing these policies just maybe on the public sector or on the government. But equally, I think that there's actually the lack of information, which is one of the issues that we have consistently mentioned during our discussion. I would put it to you that there are a lot of youths and a lot of women that are not even aware of the opportunities that exist in Cameroon for youth and women in entrepreneurship. There are a lot of youths and women who are not aware. So we have to start. If these policies have to keep going, we have to start by, first of all, sensitizing those that have to benefit from it. Put out the information on communication platforms that are easy to reach out to, because there are a lot, like I say, who are not aware of it. But then I think equally, it shouldn't be an aspect just of the public sector. We need to bring in the private sector to equally support if we really want a full impact on encouraging youth, on encouraging women to get into entrepreneurship and to benefit from the agriculture, from the agreement by maybe exporting to other countries. I will maybe cite a few initiatives that are being carried out by the private sector that are very very good and very enriching for women and youth. You can talk about maybe the financial access. It's an initiative that includes women and it includes womenpreneur. It's a pitch A-tone which offers seed funding and mini MBA training for 150 women. And equally, EcoBank's Elevate program, which has provided over 3 billion to women-led businesses, is something that is very important, which can encourage women to grow their businesses and to benefit from this agreement. There are equally digitalization and other innovations, for example, in the Ministry of Post and Telecommunication, and equally with the Ministry of Women and Family, Women and Family, MINPROF. They are connecting women to internet to enhance digital skills, because our world today is digitalized, and if women and youth are not up to standard as concerns digital skills, it becomes very difficult. MTN Cameroon's Women in Tech program also provides training on AI and cybersecurity, and equally training on e-commerce, which is a very, very key aspect as concerns the African Continental Free Trade Agreement. At the end of the day, for these policies to go forth, we need to bring in both the public and equally drag in the private sector to support women, to support youth, and equally put out the message out there so that a lot more women and youth can be informed about the opportunities and maybe grab these opportunities. Thank you, Henri.
All right, thank you for that, Mr. Dinga. So it's important that we have supportive policies, but we also have to ensure that we popularize the initiatives from the private sector, but also the NGO sector, by the way, because if you look at the report, the policy brief we published, we find that in Cameroon, there are these private sector initiatives exist, but the majority of capacity building events are carried out by organizations in the NGO sector, with the exception of the Cameroon National Shippers Council. And so it's important that every organization and everybody plays their parts to ensure that the AfCFTA becomes a reality. But I would just caution that it's important for us not to discount the importance of policy in exchange for an assertive approach of the private sector or the NGO sector. It can't be one or the other, right? I think it can be complementary. But John, so based on what you've seen so far in South Sudan, as you know, there are 48 state parties. What advice, what recommendations do you have to other countries across the continent who maybe have already ratified and published a tariff schedules and maybe started trade, but things are perhaps slower in terms of the implementation of the protocols or in terms of the implementation of the AfCFTA tools, from the Pan-African Trade System to the African Trade Observatory? For those, what advice do you have for those people based on the experience from South Sudan?
Thank you so much. Coming from South Sudan, which has not yet ratified the Africa Continental Free Trade Area, I don't think there is a very constructive advice that I would give. Rather, they are the ones that
I argue the opposite. South Sudan is a young democracy, yeah. But just because your institutions have failed in the not failed, but are taking a lot longer time in the implementation of the AfCFTA, doesn't mean that there's not been success elsewhere, right? If you look at how property rights are progressing in South Sudan versus a country like Mali or Burkina Faso, you'd find that you guys have made significant progress. So I think when it comes to lessons, it's really about us drawing from, various experiences, right? But okay, let me rephrase the question this way. What do you recommend to policymakers in South Sudan now to accelerate the implementation of the AfCFTA?
Okay, what I would recommend, thank you so much for this, and it's very important because this recommendation would help the country to move forward in terms of implementation of the Africa Continental Free Trade Area. So what I would say is signing the agreement is very important for the country because we would be able to access the bigger market. Because currently South Sudan is exporting crude oil as well as gold, as well as raw products. So if we only limit ourselves to the markets within South Sudan, so we'll have little income. But my advice would be, let's be able now to sign the agreement as a country so that we can access the bigger market where we can be able to sell our goods and also our services. And also we can be able now to get goods and services that are not in the country. We can be able to get them from other countries. So
okay, yeah. So clearly okay, we have 30 minutes for the Q&A. So if you could summarize in 1 minute, like give us point by point, what should policymakers in South Sudan do? Infrastructure, you mentioned earlier that they have to improve trade infrastructure and digital infrastructure. So what else? Maybe 2 more.
Yeah. Okay. As I've just narrated, sorry, I was having some interruption here. So I was saying it's very important for us now to improve on our policies on the ground so that we can be able to be part of the Africa Continental Free Area. So our recommendation, or my recommendation would be, one is for us to ensure that we revise our policies on the ground to make sure that these policies are aligned with the Africa Continental Free Trade Area, so that once we sign the agreement, we will be able to fall within the spectrum. Second is also, we need also to empower our human resource in terms of capacity building, because an empowered human being is an asset to the nation. So if we are able to build the capacity of our human resource to be able to understand what the benefits of the Africa Continental Trade Area, and also expose them to other countries which have already signed the agreement and are enjoying the benefit. So it would encourage them also to be part of the Africa Continental Free Trade Area by signing this agreement. So we also would like to encourage our government also to invest and also improve our infrastructure in terms of the roads, in terms of the airports and the ports, so that we can be able now to access the services from other countries. Over to you.
Okay, thank you very much. So Mr. John says investments in infrastructure, sensitizing, and ensuring that that common objective is vital to the implementation of the AfCFTA. Mr. Kenny, can you give us some recommendations? By the way, guys, all of these recommendations are available in the policy brief we published. They range from infrastructure to institutional arrangements to capacity building and training, and upskilling of private sector actors. So I please encourage everyone to go on our website, OLENT, CEPI, Impact Center for Policy Research. You can find it. Mr. Kenny, can you give us some recommendations?
Yes, so my key recommendations would be, first and foremost, that African governments must prioritize trade enabling infrastructure and certification of systems. So for Zambia, this would spell out in expanding accredited sanitary and psycho-sanitary laboratories, improving border infrastructure, for instance, especially at Kasumbalesa border post, and also providing exporters with transparent AfCFTA trade data, because that's one area I think we have been not so good at in terms of transparency with such data.
Yeah, you mentioned also, that. So data, transparency in data, investment in infrastructure. Yep, go on.
Exactly. And also probably learning from the challenges that Cameroon has. This probably would mean on your part to continuing to invest in transport infrastructure and trade facilitation systems that support exporters participating in the Guided Trade Initiative. And lastly, also for South Sudan, probably the priority should be to, the aspect of institutional readiness, including the actual ratification of the AfCFTA, aligning also with tariff schedules, with regional commitments, and strengthening customs and certification systems. Because the thing is this, when infrastructure, institutions, and private sector capacities align, the AfCFTA will then move from policy aspiration to real economic transformation, and that's what we need.
Okay, thank you very much. So I like the links you draw from infrastructure to institutions to capacity to economic transformation. Mr. Dinga, do you have any recommendations?
Thank you very much, Henri. I think the other speakers have really brought forth all the recommendations, and I just totally agree, because at the end of the day, we realize that Cameroon, most of the countries have similar challenges, like already mentioned, infrastructure capacity, awareness, institutional readiness. But I equally want to mention that another lesson countries should pick up is to focus on the aspects of the market where they have a competitive advantage. At the end of the day, everyone can produce everything or export everything. Countries should focus on where they have a competitive advantage, and they will be able to see exactly the benefits of the agreement. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. Thank you to our panelists for sharing their thoughts. I encourage everyone to go and check it's available on our website, and it would really give you a good understanding of what we try to do. I'm sure if you guys just, it's very short, it's not particularly long, it's less than 20 pages, less than 13 in total. So it's a vital tool that we've produced with actionable recommendations, and I encourage everyone to check it out. Now, before we move to the Q&A, I would just like to remind all of us here on this call that we all have a collective responsibility to ensure that the AfCFTA works. So the capacity that we expect to impart in others, we also have to be developing it, whether it's on certification or sanitary or technical standards of trade, or the AfCFTA tools or the protocols. It's important that we take the responsibility to make sure that it becomes a reality. So now I'd like us to go to now it's the question and answer session. Anyone who would like to ask a question, please just raise your hand. You can use the react button and just ask your question. So if there's anyone who has a question, please do. Okay, so if there are no questions, anyone has any questions, you can raise your hand and ask a question. If not, I have plenty of questions for the panelists. Okay, so whilst we're thinking about what questions to ask, I think we can talk a little bit about the Pan-African Payment and Settlement System. So in Africa, the majority of trade that occurs with other African countries occur in dollars. they don't really happen in our own local indigenous currencies, which makes which increases the cost of trade for entrepreneurs. Every year, Africa loses about $5 billion, sorry, in transaction costs and fees. And after the AfCFTA was launched, the AU and the AfCFTA Secretariat launched the Pan-African Payment and Settlement System. Currently, there are over 17 countries and well over 35 banks that have joined the Pan-African Payment and Settlement System. I don't know if our panelists can give us an indication of how this is going to help stimulate or drive intra-African trade. And at the local level, how do we ensure that our banks and central banks sign up to it? Anyone who feels inspired can go for it. John, Kenny. Okay. Okay. So does anybody want to share about is it essential or important for Africans to trade using their own currencies? Because if we don't trade using our own currencies, we're going to trade using other people's currencies. Can anybody speak to that? Yes, you have the floor, Kenny.
Yes, I think, the challenge that we have had as Africans is that, I don't know why, but we have always failed to trade with ourselves so much. Most of the times you'd find that we, like you've explained it already, a lot of resources, a lot of monies that we have are being, it's being lost in terms of transaction costs, which is not a good thing at the end of the day. But when we have incentives such as regional payment systems and stronger African banks, eventually our African currencies also will become strong. So the key is actually for countries to ensure that we jump onto this, to ensure that at the end of the day, with regards to inter-African transactions, we mainly deal with our own currencies. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. I just wanted to equally underscore that when we trade using the dollar, the majority of intra-African trade occurs in the dollar. You would never find that in Europe, in North America, ever. The majority of trade in Europe is about 55 to 60% is cleared in the euros, because the Europeans prioritize trading amongst themselves using their own currencies, and that reduces the risk of a currency shock or a depreciation in local currencies, because they don't rely a lot on the dollars. And it also allows our central banks to begin thinking about how to use our own currencies. If I want to buy from a Nigerian, I pay in the franc CFA, and their banks make sure that they get Naira. If the Nigerian wants to buy from me, same thing. Our banks simply make sure that I get franc CFA. So the Pan-African payment and settlement system is really, really important in that regard. Okay, it's almost, yes, John, you have the floor.
Yeah, this is a very important topic to discuss, and I would really agree with the last speaker. For us Africans, I don't know why we believe so much in foreign currencies or even foreign goods. So it's one way of saying it's just neocolonialism, because we believe that when we trade in foreign currencies, so we feel like we are superior or whatever it might be. But it's one way of trying to make Africans to feel like trading in a foreign currency is more important than trading in our local currency. I will give you an example why, and I sometimes wonder, just look at the East African community. Who would use who would be able to accept the currencies of each member states. But you realize that in these East African communities, there are some member states whose currencies are not allowed to operate within the community. Then imagine if this cannot happen within our own blocks, our own African blocks, then why would we then be able now to go and trade in other foreign currencies? Where any issues that in Iran. So let me tell you that today, the rate of dollar in South Sudan has also has dropped, okay? It has dropped. Now, so meaning if we were able to trade in our own local currency, issues that are happening in the global world would not affect us much, rather than things that are happening at the domestic level are the ones that would have affected us. So I would really say it's very important for us as Africans to use our own currency and trade in our own local currency so that we can promote each other, and then we don't rely much on the foreign currencies that would have a negative implication on our economy.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you very much, John.
As well, Henri?
Yes, Kenny.
Probably, yes. And I think another thing also is that governments and regulators should support the expansion of strong African banks across borders. Because you see, when banks operate regionally, they can finance trade between African countries more easily. For instance, an example of this is how the African Development Bank is already supporting this kind of regional financing. Yeah.
Okay. Well, guys, we're almost towards the end of our webinar. Without further ado, I would like to thank our panelists, Mr. John Mustapha, founder and CEO of OLENT, Organization for Liberty and Entrepreneurship, based in South Sudan. Mr. Kenny Suze, who led the writing for Impact Center for Policy Research, based in Zambia. Mr. Dinga, who was left off because of electricity issues. There's been a power outage in Mara, so unfortunately he couldn't stay on. Again, bringing us back to the conversation from our panelists that we need to improve our infrastructure, from roads to internet to electricity, to stimulate intra-African trade. I am Henri Kouam, the Executive Director of the Cameroon Economic Policy Institute, and I want to thank every single one of you who took the time to come here today to share, to exchange, and to support this initiative, because after all, intra-African trade would only be a reality if we want it to be. So are you ready? So, well, okay. All right. So thank you so much for your time, guys. And I will speak to you all very soon. Have a wonderful weekend. Goodbye.
Goodbye.
John, you're muted. John, you're muted. We didn't hear.
Goodbye. Thank you.
Goodbye, Kenny. Goodbye, everyone.
I'm talking about the screen picture.
Oh, right. I took some. I'm going to send them to you just after. Yeah.
All right. Thank you.
All right. Perfect. Okay. Bye-bye. Bye, everyone.